Hey guys, so we were talking about speciation a whole bunch last time in the last video with chapter 14, and now we're going to talk about the second half of that chapter, which is about extinction. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we are going to pick up right where we left off. So we were talking about speciation and all the different ways that speciation can happen, what a species is with the biological species concept, different types of reproductive isolation. We talked about allopatric versus sympatric speciation. So if you need a refresher on those, go watch it. So our fossil record supports two hypotheses about the pace of evolution. First, you have this sort of gradualism, and then you have what is called punctuated equilibrium. And we're going to talk about what both of those mean. So gradualism is where you have these incremental changes over many generations. And so this is supported some in the fossil record, but this gradualism is much harder to see than something like punctuated equilibrium, okay? So punctuated equilibrium suggests that long periods of little change are interrupted by bouts of rapid change. And this is much more present in the fossil record. That's because it can be brought about by a whole lot of things. So evolution might occur quickly when a key adaptation arises. We know that that happens. For instance, the first flowering plants, they diversified quickly because they had a new adaptation. Flowers were like pulling in pollinators. That was a whole new way of spreading their pollen, spreading their seeds all over the place. It was a new option for reproduction, okay? So you had all sorts of diversification after that key adaptation arose. Oh look, Leah is joining us. Hello. Say hi. She's the sweetest. Leah, I'm doing something. All right, like I said, punctuated equilibrium is seen so easily in the fossil record. Oh, babe, it's fireworks. Fuck. I paused it.
Come on, babe. Leah, come. Come on, babe.
It's okay, go. It's okay, go.
Leah, come. Leah.
Go.
Babe, come.
Go.
Come on.
Fucking A. She doesn't want to. Oh, Koopy. It's okay. It's okay. Sorry, my dogs are going crazy because of the fireworks. So punctuated equilibrium, evolution might occur quickly following a mass extinction event. So we saw this when you had extinction of the non-avian dinosaur families around 65 million years ago. What we saw is that right after that major extinction event, it opened up habitats, it opened up resources in order for these mammalian families to explode in variation. It's amazing. And think about it. I mean, the mammals before the dinosaurs died off, they were small. They were like tree dwelling. They were like much different than all of the gigantic mammals that we were seeing after the dinosaur extinction. So surviving organisms exploit new resources in the changed environment. Now, we talked about this in, I think it was chapter 12 or 13, about how you have a competition for resources, and every habitat has more life than it can actually support. So there's always going to be this competition for resources. So when you kill off a bunch of these dinosaur families, well then guess what? It's freeing up a whole lot of resources, a whole lot of space. You can reproduce more, you are able to diversify more. So that's a pretty amazing thing that we're able to easily see in the fossil record. A species is extinct when all of its members have died. Also, you can be functionally extinct though. So for instance, when I think it was the black rhino just last year became functionally extinct, and now I think that it's actually extinct, was when there was only one male left on the planet. That was all, one male. Or even if it had been one female, if you only have one of a species, you're not doing anything. Even if you had one male and one female, you have no genetic diversity anymore. There's no way that that species is coming back from that loss of genetic diversity. So you can be functionally extinct, but actually extinct is when all of your members of that species have died. So extinction is normal. Extinction is totally normal. It has happened throughout the course of history. We know that it happens all the time. Most extinctions, like down here, all these little dots down here, occur as part of the background extinction rate, which means that it's the pace at which species go extinct due to gradually changing environments. This is the normal levels of extinction over millions of years, the normal levels of extinction. And look at this. This is families per million years. The number of families per million years. Okay, so like if we're looking at 5 to 7-ish families per million year, that's a lot. That could be a lot of species. That could be very little species. But when you get up to 20 million families, even 10 million families per million years, that is what we call, hold on, here we go, a mass extinction event. So Earth has witnessed 5 mass extinction events in the last 600 million years. And this is when you have a ton of families that are going extinct. Remember, you have family, genus, species. So potentially thousands of species are in each family. Potentially only a few species are in each family, but that's how the Linnaean classification system works. So tens of families going extinct per million years, that classifies as a mass extinction event. We've only had 5 in the last 600 million years, and we're actually going through another one right now. Impact theory suggests that meteorites or comets caused some mass extinction events, and this would not be part of the mass or the background extinction rate. When something happens to cause a mass extinction event, it is easily notable in the fossil record. So here, if you have this like chunk of rock, and what you can see is that the sediment completely changes, uniformly changes through this whole stretch of land mass. What this means, look, you have this dark rock, it is completely uniform, and then you have this band of what looks like ash. What probably happened was something like impact theory. You have a meteorite or a comet, something like that, that demolishes wherever it lands, like kicks up a ton of debris, masks the sunlight, and then you're going to have a ton of extinction in that area because, well, especially if you have that species limited to that area, because you have fundamentally changed their environments. So if you see something like this, like ash, that's something significant happened and it stretched for quite a long period of time. Isn't that amazing? So debris suspended in the atmosphere after a collision dramatically changed the environment, leading to the extinction of many species. Plate tectonics could also explain mass extinction events. So if you were, if you had species on Pangea or Gondwana, and then you have this physical movement of a separation of continents, well, guess what? First of all, you're going to have a lot of speciation because microevolution leads to macroevolution, different species. But then also, some of these organisms aren't going to survive with changing climates and all sorts of things. Now humans are changing so much of the biosphere that we are experiencing a 6th mass extinction event. And this is from like if we look at this, okay, monoculture, if we look at this logging, incredible, like in a bad way, amounts of logging, literal deforestation happening all over the world, all over the world. If you just go down the road in Batesville, every day we see just logging trucks, just constantly. And what are they doing? I mean, they're making room for more housing. They're making room for more, like, whatever. Then you have things like concrete jungles, okay? Like New York City. I think this is New York, is it? No, wait, is it San Francisco? That probably makes more sense. Anyway, it's a big old city. And these concrete jungles, what actually happens in these big cities is that you have completely eliminated all of the diversity in this habitat. You have completely changed the overall habitat. You've completely changed how organisms that used to be in that environment would obtain food, obtain mates, ruining everything, literally everything. All right, so things that could increase the extinction rate: impact theory, plate tectonics, human impact. Why is a species with a small, oh, by the way, we will talk so much more about human impact. That's what the whole second like half of this course is about. Especially in the last week, we will talk a ton about human impact. So why is a species with a small population more likely than a species with a large population to undergo extinction? Because small populations are exposed to greater environmental changes. It's not that they're exposed to greater environmental changes. It's not that more environmental changes happen to small populations. It's just that they affect them harder, right? Because genetic diversity is likely to be lower in a small population. This is true. C, because the mutation rate is too low. This isn't a thing. Because they take too long to produce offspring. No. So small population is more likely to undergo extinction because of this reduced genetic diversity. If you have a change in your environment and you're not able to, if you don't have a member of that species with a key adaptation that would allow them to survive and reproduce, that species is going to go extinct in that small population. All right, so you have a species. Now what? We classify them. Here is where, from the last video, I told you that we were going to talk more about the Linnaean classification system. And if you remember, I told you to remember, dear King Philip came over for good spaghetti. Dear King Philip came over for good spaghetti. That's your acronym for all of these taxonomic groupings. So biologists organize all species into this classification system, this Linnaean classification system. And this is called taxonomy. So taxonomy is the science of naming, describing, and classifying species. Now, nowadays, taxonomy goes along with the biological species concept. It goes along with DNA sequencing. We can change taxonomy, but it used to be that taxonomy was exclusively based on how things looked. And that makes sense because it was started by Carolus Linnaeus. So your taxonomic hierarchy organizes these species into these progressively larger groups. So you start with a species. The number of species is 1. Then you go to a genus. You could have a ton of species in a genus. Then your bigger grouping is family, and then many families make up an order. Many orders make up a class, and so on and so on and so on, until you reach domains that have several million species within that domain. Okay, this is called Linnaean classification. Now, phylogenetics. Okay, if I'm going too fast, I know that I'm going fast, but I'm not able to engage with you. So if you have any questions, please make sure that you comment under this YouTube video or pause and go back. Listen to something as many times as you need to. That's kind of the beauty of these recorded lectures. So this is a phylogeny. This is a phylogenetic tree Phylogenetics is the study of evolutionary relationships among species. So how species are related to each other, we can visualize using phylogenetics. All right, now I'm going to teach you how to read a phylogeny. All right, they're based on common descent. So a lot of students, and I wish we were together so I could show you that almost every single one of you, even the ones who think that you know how to read a phylogeny, like you don't, okay? Well, I mean, you might. But most students, they start off with ladder thinking, okay? So if I said, what species is species 10 most closely related to? Think about it for a second. What species is species 10 most closely related to? Most of you would say species 9, right? Okay. Phylogenies are based on common descent. So if you, all right, at the ends of all of these branches, you have a species. If you take species 10 and you move it backwards, move it backwards, move it backwards, move it backwards, you have this common ancestor between species 10 and potentially one other species, potentially a bunch of other species. In this case, you have a common ancestor that includes every single one of these other species, meaning that species 1 is as closely related to species 10 as species 9, okay? All of these share a common ancestor with species 10, so none of them are more closely related to species 10. They're all equally related. All right, so if you, hold on. Oh, let's do this. Okay, so if you're looking at species 1 and 2, you want to resist ladder thinking, okay? It does so happen that species 1 and species 2 are most closely related to each other. But then if you look at species 3, what species is most closely related to species 3? Well, how you have to answer that question is go from species 3, the end of this branch, and move it backwards. Here is a common ancestor for species 3. What is included? What shares this common ancestor? And you move down the other branch and you can see it's species 1 and species 2. So species 1 and 2 are equally related to species 3. The same thing happens with species 4. Here is the common ancestor for species 4, species 3, species 2, and species 1, the common ancestor for all 4 of those species, meaning that species 4 is going to be equally related to 1 as it is to 3, okay? We're going by common ancestors. If you move down to species 6 and 7, if you say what species is most closely related to 6, trace back 6. Oh, look, it has this branching point. That branching point indicates a common ancestor. What does it share this branching point with? It shares it with 7. So in this case, species 6 is most closely related to species 7. What is, okay. Is species 5 more closely related to species 6 or to species 7? Is species 5 most closely related to species 6 or to species 7? Think about it for a second. Okay. Trace back species 6 and 7. It's here. How is species 5 like related to them? Well, it shares this common ancestor with species 6 and 7, meaning species 5 is equally related to 6 and 7, okay? I hope that makes sense to you. So a cladogram is a type of phylogenetic tree, and you're basically like lumping these species together. So for instance, birds, for instance, crocodiles, turtles, mammals, you're lumping these groupings together. A clade is a group of organisms consisting of a common ancestor and all of its descendants. So here, if you have a clade in this box right here, here is a common ancestor right at this node, And if you trace back, okay, well, what organisms, what descendants does this clade include? Birds and non-avian dinosaurs. Then you've got this bigger clade with this common ancestor. What groups, what descendants are included with this common ancestor? Birds, non-avian dinosaurs, and crocodiles. And you can keep going, keep going, keep going. So for instance, here is a node that signifies your common ancestor. What are the descendants of this common ancestor? Well, everything from the top to mammals. So mammals, turtles, lizards and snakes, crocodiles, non-avian dinosaurs, and birds. According to this cladogram, a bird is more closely related to a dinosaur than a crocodile. That's the truth. What the F? Non-avian, it's not even more closely related to the avian dinosaurs. Like what? Like it's closely related to all dinosaurs. Okay. All right, guys, what is the most recent common ancestor of species 7, 8, and 9? And I've bolded them for you. Take a look at this, and then I will explain it. So is A, B, C, D, or E? What is the most recent common ancestor of species 7, 8, and 9? Most recent common ancestors shared by species 7, 8, and 9. Okay. If you want to figure out the most recent common ancestor shared by different species, you're going to just take that branch and you're just going to trace it back. You say, okay, does this include species 7, 8, and 9? Well, no, it just includes species 6. So you keep tracing it back. Okay, we've got A, cool. Does it include species 7, 8, and 9? Well, no, because species 8 and 9 are over here. So you keep tracing it back. B, does common ancestor B include species 7, 8, and 9? Yes, because if you come like this, it includes 9, 8, and 7. Okay, so just check yourself though. Species D, does it include species 7, 8, and 9? No, only species 7 or 8 and 9. Node E, this isn't even a common ancestor. This wouldn't even make sense. Okay, then C, does common ancestor C include species 7, 8, and 9? Yes, but is it the most recent common ancestor? No, B is the most recent common ancestor. C is the next most recent common ancestor. It's like further out, okay? Woo. So it's B. All right. Guys, I'm getting tired of talking. I'm glad this is not a 2-hour class. So, guys, I know we would be stopping for questions in that. I like shouldn't say that. So, one of my very favorite experiments of all time. All right, 2 closely related plant species were used to study speciation. We're used to study, okay, what mutations could have affected why these species diverged from each other, why they're 2 separate species. So scientists hypothesized that a mutation that changed the flower color of some of these mimulus plants started the speciation event that separated the 2 species. All right, so what they did, they have 2 species of mimulus. First of all, you have this purple, pinkish species called Mimulus lewisii. Mimulus lewisii looks like this as the wild type, and then Mimulus cardinalis looks like this. It's this scarlet, sort of red-orange sort of color, okay? And if you look, what happened is that the researchers used selective breeding, artificial selection. They said, okay, we're going to select colors in these plants that get us closer and closer to the color of the other species. So we wanted to turn this pink purple flower color into this orangish color that Mimulus cardinalis had. And we wanted to turn Mimulus cardinalis into the selectively bred type that got as close as possible to this pink purple Mimulus lewisii. Okay, so you're basically changing the colors of each of these species to mimic the colors, only the colors of the other species. Because does Cardinalis all of a sudden physically look like lewisii? No. Does lewisii all of a sudden just look like Cardinalis? No, it doesn't. All right, so they just wanted to mimic the color of the other species. And what they found is that these new varieties of selectively bred flower colors, they had different frequency in pollinator visits than the wild type varieties. So I'm going to take you through this. In the wild type Mimulus lewisii, what they were seeing, so in this like pink purple version of the wild type, they saw that this was visited much more frequently by bumblebees than by hummingbirds. Very seldomly was it visited by hummingbirds, more often by bumblebees. In the wild type Mimulus cardinalis, it was much more often visited by hummingbirds instead of by bumblebees. Very rarely was it visited by bumblebees. Then you do this selective artificial selection breeding, change the colors, and now instead of almost always being visited by bumblebees, you have a significant reduction in the number of times that this flower with the new color is visited by bumblebees. And look, okay, so significantly less visits by bumblebees, significantly more visits by hummingbirds. What? All right, then in Mimulus cardinalis, which was mostly visited by hummingbirds, you have a small reduction in the number of visits by hummingbirds, but it was rarely visited by bumblebees, and it became much more attractive to bumblebees once you changed that color, just the color of the plant. How amazing is that? So a mutation in a gene affecting flower color may have caused a shift in pollinator preferences, which reproductively isolated some individuals in the population. Okay, a color change changes the pollinator preferences, and then microevolutionary changes. If you have a bumblebee as a pollinator, you don't need this long like tube, okay, that's filled with nectar. You just don't. The bees aren't going to get to it. Instead, you need this like fuzzy bottom looking thing, okay? Versus hummingbirds, they don't want something like this. They want a tube like this that gives them a lot of nectar, okay? As you are visited more and more frequently by pollinators, the flowers that are able to attract pollinators more often and thus able to reproduce more often are going to live and like pass their genetics down to the next generation. So you have this coevolution where this flower, even if they started out looking the exact same, they evolve to match what the pollinators prefer. Okay, so it could be that the whole difference in these flowers, they were once the same species, then speciation happened and now they're not. It could have started just with a mutation in a gene affecting flower color. Isn't that amazing? One mutation, only changing flower color, might have caused a population to diverge into two species. That is amazing. Know this experiment, replay it, replay me talking about it, know it, because Mimulus is cool as shit. All right. I hope you like Mimulus. I literally almost went to grad school to study Mimulus because it is freaking cool. So yeah, guys, y'all have a great day.